Yeah. So how can I start? How can I, probably I have to. How do I start then?
Ulrike, it says that we are live.
We are live now. Okay,
Yeah.
great. I can't see anything else. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to our afternoon session, late afternoon session. The session will be on food policy and governance, examining linkages and food security outcomes. So I'm very happy to have 4 speakers with me. I will introduce them to you one after the other. And let me also mention, my name is Ulrike Grote. I'm from the Leibniz University of Hanover. As you can see in the background, that's our main building in Hanover. And I'm a professor there, and I'm heading the Institute for Environmental Economics and World Trade at the Economics faculty. Yes, and as I said, we have 4 speakers, and the first speaker will be Helga Gruberg. She has done some nice research on power, legitimacy, and participation in the co-creation of water policy. So she has looked at integrated water resources management, and she is actually from the Ghent University, PhD student from Ghent University, Department of Agricultural Economics, and originally she is from Bolivia. And she had submitted this research with 3 colleagues of her. And yes, I think we are very much looking forward to your presentation, Helga.
Thank you very much, Ulrike. So I don't know, they have to present the recording?
I thought so. How does it work now? Yes, I think it's coming. Yes, perfect. I can't hear anything. I think we don't have a tone yet. Can you hear anything?
No, there's no sound.
No, not at all.
Dear organizers, do we get a... Can we maybe start from the beginning? Would that be possible? Thank you.
Formulating the process, implementing the policy, and finally doing a whole evaluation. However, there are a series of power relationships, people's interests, agency, and knowledge that interact in very complex ways. If we don't take into consideration power imbalances since the beginning until the end of the process, there is a high possibility that certain stakeholders may end up dominating the process, and stakeholders with less power end up being dominated, abused, or even excluded. And this is very common in development projects and has been defined as the tyranny of the participative approach. And this is also reflected when we talk about water rights and policy, where conventional academia and dominant policy making has analyzed water rights in a very narrow way. Therefore, it is imperative to study the making of a water rights policy from a broader perspective in order to unveil insights for the creation of more inclusive, legitimate, and empowering public policies. This study tackles this need by studying how power relations, interest, agency, structures, and knowledge interact in the context of co-creation process of a water policy in Bolivia. So usually power is giving a negative connotation of domination. However, power is the ability of actors to achieve their goals. From all the different expressions of power, power over has a negative connotation of domination of an individual or a group of individuals over another one. And this kind of expression of power is the one that limits people's agency, collective action, and empowerment. It is very important to develop a power analysis because it's quite a learning process where we can identify, for example, those expressions of power that has negative connotations and try to reverse them in order to achieve the empowerment of people. And also this kind of analysis allow us to identify and prevent, for example, social conflicts and the different kinds of social and political structures that define power. So the study takes place in Bolivia, in Cochabamba, which is my hometown, in a rural municipality that is called TIRAQUE. And TIRAQUE is well known because of water struggles. Only between 1996 and 2007, a total of 195 water conflicts were reported. And from these, most of them, as you can see in the graph, most of them were related to competing claims and water access and water rights. And there are also other problems related to water, like water distribution problems, pollution of water sources, overexploitation of groundwater, and limited access to water for irrigation. Because of all of these issues, the municipality identified the need to create a policy about the protection of water sources and recharge areas, and this was in 2017, and we accompanied the whole process between 2017 and 2019, and we transcribed and did a content analysis of 110 audios from interviews, meetings, discourses, and so on. So as I told you, in 2017 the municipality identified this need. And then in March of 2018, an international NGO asked a local NGO to lead the process of creation of the public policy until its final approval. So the NGO in 2019, in February, managed to include the construction of this policy in the agenda of different public and social organizations. And between April and August, they developed a series of workshops and presented a draft of a public policy developed by the NGO in Spanish. It's important to highlight this because these communities are Quechua native speakers, okay? Then they presented the public policy to the municipal council for its final approval. Then in October 2019, which is in red, we had the presidential elections. And they were not only controversial, but they play a key role in this whole process. Then in January of 2020, the policy was rejected. And at the beginning, nobody understood why. And I will try to show you the reasons. But to do so, I have to start with the structure of the social organization of peasants in Bolivia, which is formed by the communities, represented by unions, and then it goes up to the national level of the confederation. And in this whole structure, the provincial is quite important because they, at this level, many important decisions are taken. For example, in TIRAQUE, the candidates running for mayor or for MAS, which is Evo Morales' political party, are chosen at this level. So you can see that the provincial from the peasant organization is quite powerful, and they are even more powerful than the mayor and than the municipal council. Why? Because the mayor, at the end of the day, has to respond to the needs and demands presented by the provincial. So who makes the decision? So here again we have the structure, and usually what happens is that here the policy in Spanish was presented, and the authorities here, they were supposed to take the information to the grassroots so that they could review the policy and give feedback. But what happened is that it was written in Spanish and in a legal technical way, so people didn't understand quite well what was the content of the policy, so it didn't reach the grassroots. So a lot of confusion and distrust was generated. And the same happened with the participation. Although women were present in these meetings, their participation remained in the shadows. So this also generated a lot of distrust. So as you can see, there are a lot of interest going on, like political. It was the moment of the political campaign for the presidential elections. So nobody wanted any kind of conflicts at this time, okay? So there are also institutional interest. The NGO wanted to comply with the requirements of their funding agency. And of course, there are always personal interest. So when we talk about visible power, we talk a little bit about knowledge. As you can see, whose knowledge was present, like if women's knowledge was considered, and was information available in an understandable way for people? No. So let's see what happens at an invisible level of power. So we have to ask ourselves who's setting the agenda. And it is not these guys that have a visible power. It was actually the NGO, because the NGO was able to set the construction of the policy and the agenda of the council with the mayor and then at the provincial. So the NGO has invisible power. And whose interests are outside of the public eye? Well, there are a lot of municipalities that depend on the water of TIRAQUE. So they had a lot of interest at stake with this policy. They were going to be affected by whatever happened with this policy. And then we have to talk about those people that are against the process and against the policy. And in this case, it was the irrigators, because they felt that through the policy, they were going to lose control over the water and land resources. So it's not that they were completely against of the law. It was more that they didn't understand the content of the law and if they were going to lose control. So what they did is that they went to the provincial and said, look, we don't like this. And La Provincial, they didn't want any kind of problems during the political campaign. So what they did is they froze the whole thing. And what they asked the irrigators is they asked for a pilot project. They say, okay, I want to see the results, and if everything is fine, then we will revisit the public policy. So at the end of the day, the guys that have a lot of invisible power are the irrigators, because they managed to change the agenda. So invisible power is about agency. And finally, when we talk about hidden power, we talk about norms and structures and beliefs. And in the Andes, is more, rather of being about the individual, is more about the community. So even though you disagree with a certain policy, at the end of the day, you accept for what is established. So hidden power is about structures. So power relations should be a fundamental part of policy formulation for all nations, and knowledge, interest, agency, and social structures define different forms of power. And we really think that we need to step away from the linear silo kind of thinking for policy construction and go for a more collaborative governance where these complex dynamics are taken into consideration. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Helga. That was a very nice and I think very clear presentation, and a very good example of Bolivia, of your own country. Now the floor is actually open for discussion. After this 10-minute presentations, we always have like 5 minutes for questions and answers. Now I'm just wondering, I don't see any questions yet. If that's not the case, let me just ask one, because I was wondering, so you stressed very much the power of the irrigators.
Yeah.
Do you think that if more information would have been provided to the irrigators, that maybe they would have sort of cooperated a little bit more, they wouldn't have sort of gone against sort of the other actors in the game, so more or less?
Yes, probably it would have been that way. And they were actually identified by the NGO at the very beginning of the process as kind of conflicting, and they wanted to work individually with them, but they were asked by this provincial, they said, no, you're going to work with everybody together. So probably if the irrigators would have understood the content of the law and if they were going to be affected or not from the beginning, probably the situation would have been different, because now they are asking for a concrete example that will show them that they are not going to lose this control over water and land resources.
Okay. Good, thank you very much. Further questions?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I have a question about because from the red dots that we saw there, it seems that it actually changed so many things. Do you think that there would have been a different outcome if maybe there wasn't any election during the period? Do you think that the policy would have gone, or yeah, what do you suggest or think would have happened if there was no election in the period?
Good question.
Probably, yeah, it's a very good question. I think that probably there would have been more spaces to explain even further, for example, the content of the law, to develop more meetings and to do more things. But the thing is that it was so controversial. I don't know if you know about it, but Bolivia changed completely from that point on. So people just don't want to get in any kind of negotiation, any kind of problems, because inside these organizations, they are experiencing a lot of changes. So probably if this wouldn't happen, they would have opened more spaces for negotiation and explanation and so on. But that's just my point of view, no?
Yes, and I think it's true because okay, maybe it's a form of a question. You have the actors like the provincials, the irrigators, and then the NGOs. So I would think of the irrigators as the grassroots, and if I'm correct, that means the solution would have been initiating the policy with the grassroots or with the irrigators from the onset instead of imposing, because my work is also similar to agency and the need of incorporating this grassroots in policy formulation. Yeah.
Yes, and the ideal would have been to work with the grassroots, with the communities. But the thing is that the one that decided how the process was going to be done was the provincial. And they said, you're going to do it at this level, and then the information has to go down to the grassroots. And then the grassroots will have to debate and discuss and then give back the information up. But of course, it didn't happen. And it was because of the kind of structure. They have a very vertical, hierarchical, structure. But that's a very good point.
So now I still don't see any questions. Maybe that's coming up with the second speaker. If I see correctly, we have around 300 people in our community. I don't know whether they're really all online and listening to us at the moment. I hope it doesn't add the pressure to the remaining speakers. But they're not sort of asking any questions. Okay, so then I suggest that we proceed. We come to the second presentation, and that will be by Mr. Shukuma Ume. He is a PhD student actually from the Institute of Agricultural Policy and Market Research at the Justus Liebig University in Gießen. And he has, looked at a topic which is a bit similar. So the topic of his presentation is linking agency to food and nutrition security, the role of agroecology. So he applies it to agroecology, and he's also looking at Nigeria more specifically. So the floor is yours, I would say. I think your presentation has been also taped, is that correct?
Yes.
So let's hope that the organizers can manage to start the presentation now. Just have to wait and see. Dear organizers, can you please? Yes.
Good day all. My name is Chukuma Ume. I am a PhD candidate from the University of Gießen. My presentation
Again, we don't have a tone.
conceptual framework
We can't
based
hear
on
anything.
literature that attempts to show the linkage between Ume. I am a PhD. Good day all. My name is Chukuma Ume. I am a PhD candidate from the University of Gießen. My presentation is a conceptual framework based on literature that attempts to show the linkage between agency and food and nutrition security and the role of agroecology in achieving food security. I will begin this presentation by showing the status of hunger and malnutrition in Nigeria in the last decade and the level of food production within the same period. This figure, as you can see, shows that within the last 10 years, food security has been on a decline, even though food production has consistently increased within the same period. Now, this trend is common among developing nations and certainly not peculiar to Nigeria. This observation led me to question the narrative that increasing food production will lead to food security. Hence, the need to rethink how we conceptualize, analyze, and grapple with the challenge of food security. Research, especially in the field of agroecology and sustainable food system, have shown how structural drivers other than production alone can institutionalize economic structures that ultimately lead to food insecurity. These structures can be the variations in economic and material capabilities of actors in a food system, the network and power structures in the system, and even the norms, the social norms and ideologies. These are what the high level panel of experts in food and nutrition security alludes to shape rural households agency for food and nutrition. According to the high-level panel of experts, agency is the capacity of farmers or individuals to define their desired food systems and to make strategic life choices in securing the outcomes. The concept of agency has therefore received so much attention among researchers, policymakers, and so on, but surprisingly, limited empirical investigation. This is because limited strategic guidelines currently exist on how or what actually constitutes agency for food and nutrition security and how agency can be supported. My study therefore asks, what constitutes agency for food and nutrition security? And how does agroecology shape this agency for food and nutrition security among rural households? The concept of agroecology has emerged as a field that goes beyond looking at the cultural practices, farming method, sustainable climate smart agriculture, and other sustainable innovative production farming systems, to also look at the organizations, the power dynamics, the social and political dimensions within a food system, and how farmers organize themselves in order to have a voice in achieving their desired outcome. To answer the research questions, we assessed literature on agroecology, food security, and agency from 1996, when the concept of food sovereignty was first brought to the public domain at the World Food Summit, until now. Our study showed that first, farmers with the capacity to function or with agency have the agency or the freedom to allocate resources. Here, we consider land and labor, to be more specific, on reproductive activities or on food production rather than on cash crops or commodity crops. Secondly, farmers with some level of agency also have the freedom to achieve production diversity, which is a very important determinant of dietary diversity. We also identified 3 pathways through which agroecology empowers rural household agency for food and nutrition security. First is through the relationship they have with nature. Assessed literature showed that agroecology farmers achieve production efficiency and increase productivity by employing sustainable natural cultural farm practices supported by nature and not external inputs which involve costs. Second is by having a relationship with their peers. By so doing, they create a network and knowledge production and sharing mechanisms. And finally, agroecology farmers facilitate an agroecology market that is based on trust, price stability, and sometimes even exchange of food, which enables them to subsist and maintain diversity. We present the linkage between agency enabling structures, and food and nutrition security. We show that by improving production efficiency and creating an agroecology market, farmers can easily make labor allocation choices that ensures their access to food and stability over time. Also, through networks and knowledge creation and sharing, they also overcome the structures that pushes farmers to monotonous cropping, thereby ensuring availability, utilization, and dietary diversity. In summary, based on literature, we show how agroecology farmers can better enhance their welfare and achieve economic, social, and environmental benefits in terms of access to labor, that is, the ability to work for themselves or to work for whoever or wherever they want to. In terms of income generation through efficiency, in terms of networking through peer-to-peer movements and organizations, and knowledge creation. These structures can be manipulated to enable the capacity of farmers to make their own food decisions, which ultimately shape their food and security, nutrition security. Achieving food security in our submission does not really depend only on how much is produced, but the organization, the system that leads from production to consumption, the actors within, how they interact among themselves, and how they are able to have a voice in order to achieve their goal or their aim. These are the structures that either enable or hinders the achievement of food security in any food system. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Chupuma. That was also a very clear presentation. Thank you. Nice literature review. Are there any questions on this? Again, I don't see any questions from the group. I very much liked sort of the agroecology agency pathways which you identified, and I was wondering, are you now planning to do some further research on these different pathways?
Exactly, yes. So the framework is more like, okay, we suggested both a quantitative and qualitative method for testing this framework to based on empirical data that we intend to collect from Nigeria in the coming days. But this would have been done earlier before now, but due to the pandemic, so we had to like delay for now. So this can be, we can test this framework not just in Nigeria, but in multiple places to ensure that actually they work. So yes, I think using literature, we have to formulate this framework. So it's not like something we think of, yeah, maybe with production diversity and labor allocation, we can achieve food security, but we actually assess literature that have proven that this actually is the case. But personally, I also want to collect data to test the framework as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I just see there's one comment. I don't know how to ask questions. Somebody is writing. We can only watch by YouTube. Actually, like you did write this note now, you can also write down your question. So you have to write it down. You can't ask directly. So we are happy to to wait a couple of minutes.
Perhaps I can
Yes,
ask
another
while we
question.
wait.
Robert,
Yes.
please.
Thank you very much, Chukuma. Now there is a debate on as to how different agroecology is. Turn on my video. There is a debate on how different agroecology is with conservation agriculture, for example, with climate smart agriculture, agrobiodiversity, and so many different but related concepts. So I was just wondering, could you give us ideas as to how you are integrating these concepts or how different they are, and therefore perhaps how you treat agroecology differently?
Yeah, that's very good. That's very true, because even organic farming and so on and so forth, these are some literature call them elements of agroecology. Some say it's just a co-option of the term agroecology, but I think that they are also a level of agroecology. So agroecology is more of the practice, but it's also a movement. So climate smart agriculture, organic farming, this for me is, in my opinion, are the practice aspect of agroecology that tend to use nature, like a conservation agriculture, to use nature instead of using external inputs. But beyond the practice, beyond the farming practice and the farming system, there is also the food system aspect of it, where we look at how these farmers organize themselves, how they produce the knowledge, and how they share the knowledge as well. So agroecology is more like a broader aspect of climate smart agriculture and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, are there any further questions? As I just said, if you have a question, you have to write it down. You have to type it in on the official Tropentag conference website. Yes, I can see one here. There is a tendency, at least, that's from Mr. Joost Dessen, there's a tendency, at least in Belgium, to neglect the movement aspect of AE, agroecology, I suppose,
Yes.
hence to depolitize it, politicize it, sorry. Do you experience the same? Do you actually experience the same? And is this not a tendency to make AE less threatening?
Exactly. So the strength of agroecology actually is the political and social dimension of it. So depoliticizing agroecology is weakening agroecology, because agroecology tends to give voice to the peasants, to smallholder farmers, and that is the politics, that is the social aspect of it. And concentrating only, like Mbeche said, concentrating only on the farming aspect of it, and yes, the sustainable production aspect of it, is just weakening agroecology. And that is not actually what agroecology stands for. So agroecology stands for the practice, the science, and more especially the movement. So these are actually the three elements, if I may say, of agroecology. So I believe, in my experience, yes, although in a place like Nigeria, agroecology is still at the infant stage. So and what you just said now is actually one of the reasons why it is still not being upscaled in a place like Nigeria. So actually, yes, I experienced these things, and that is what we try to put forward there in the public domain to understand what agroecology actually is, the politics and the social aspect of it. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now there's a further question. I don't know whether you can read the question as well. There's a question by Rex Parro. Among the access to labor, income generation, networking, and knowledge creation, who among these focus could greatly contribute to enhance the welfare and the stated benefits? So who of these four pathways? Among the access to labor, income generation, these are the pathways you mentioned, huh?
Yes.
Income generation, networking, and knowledge creation, who among these could greatly contribute to enhance the welfare and the stated benefits? So which ones are really contributing to welfare increase and so on?
Exactly. So these are not in isolation to each other. They are actually interlinked in one way or the other. For instance, if you look at knowledge creation, it is also a part of networking, because it's the aspect of networking and association that gives them the opportunity to create and share knowledge as well. So for me, in my opinion, I present it in form of an interlinkage. So each one of them are very potent, but they are better if they leverage on each other to achieve a better welfare. So I can't really say income or knowledge creation is more potent or is better than the other. So they are more like like a leverage on each other for better welfare creation. Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Good. I think then let's move to the next presentation, and that will be by Dr. Robert Mbeshe. Robert, you are a lecturer from the Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Nairobi, Kenya. And you wanted to tell us something about the urban food policies and governance in Kenya. And you want to look at the linkages between urban food policies and governance, actually. So I think this will be a live presentation, or did you tape it as well?
I didn't tape it. I would like to try a live presentation.
Great.
I'm hoping my internet won't fluctuate in the process. Please let me know if you're able to see the slide.
Yes, it's all perfect. I can also hear you. I can see everything. I think the floor is yours. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. So today I want to talk about urban food policies and governance linkages using a case of Nairobi City in Kenya. I am from the Department of Agricultural Economics at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology in Nairobi. Now, just to set the context to this talk today, globally, the commitment to end hunger and malnutrition is there. We know that SDG 2 is committed to ending hunger, achieving food security, improving nutrition outcomes. But there is also an SDG 11 which seeks to make cities sustainable. So these are important commitments. However, the cases of poverty and food insecurity are rising, particularly in urban areas. And in the case of Kenya, Nairobi, which is the capital city of Kenya, has about 4 million people. Half of these people are malnourished. 1 million of these people are hungry, with another 1 million being overweight. So this is what we call a double burden of malnutrition. So there are various governance frameworks, policy and legal frameworks seeking to address issues of malnutrition, but there is a minimal understanding on the extent to which these frameworks or policy and governance frameworks support a sustainable food system. So my presentation today seeks to examine some of these policies and the governance issues around them and the extent to which they might be able to deliver a sustainable food system. So in conducting this study, which we did in 2018, we reviewed a number of food system policies and also did key informant interviews with actors in the food system in Nairobi. So just to give you the context of food policy in Kenya, Kenya's constitution, which was promulgated in 2010, provides for the right for free people's rights to be free from hunger, having access to quality food, children rights to good nutrition, and access to productive resources. So consequently, a food policy was developed and a Food and Nutrition Security Bill later on in 2014, focusing on providing access to the poor, people with food that is nutritious. And then the food policy and the Food and Nutrition Security Bill, which has not been passed to date, also sought to provide a coordinating framework of the different agencies that were supposed to have a role in the food system. And prior to 2010, that is when the constitution was passed, the new constitution, food policy, and this is probably very much similar in other contexts in sub-Saharan Africa and elsewhere, was very much considered largely a rural issue. So urban areas were not considered as much as under food policy, again, because food was considered as production issue. And literature has shown that urban food insecurity was a critical gap in the MDG implementation. And that is why in SDGs, food policy was considered a critical issue from SDG 2. So when we zoomed into the urban food policies in Kenya, with a specific focus on Nairobi, there are a number of them, but I've picked a few of them just to illustrate. Before 2011, urban food production was not allowed. It was considered a nuisance. It was actually a crime to produce food within the city region. But the Ministry of Agriculture produced or developed the National Urban Peri-Urban Agriculture and Livestock Policy, which basically created a U-turn on urban agriculture issues. So the policy, unfortunately, wasn't fully finalized, and then it didn't manage to set up a governance structure for the implementation of that policy. So, but following the constitution, there was a requirement to set up other policies, as I will be talking about. The county government of Nairobi, Kenya has got a dual system of governance. There is the national government and county governments, 47 of them. So Nairobi City is governed by a county government, which has an executive arm and a parliament. And so the parliament, which is called a county assembly, came up with the Nairobi Agriculture and Production and Regulation Act of 2015. So this legislation basically allowed or legalized agricultural practices in the city, but more focusing on crop production as opposed to livestock production, but more or less allowed agricultural production. But in that policy, there isn't a specific issue or addressing complexities of land issues within the city. Then there is the Urban Areas and Cities Act, which basically allowed agriculture as well, because this is more or less a spatial planning kind of act that allowed agriculture within the city areas. There is the Physical Planning Act, which for the first time classified agricultural land uses as allowable land uses within certain areas of the city. There is the Public Health Act, which explicitly declined production of food in the city. But after 2014, the Public Health Act was revised to allow certain aspects of animal livestock production Crop production is largely allowed, but certain aspects of livestock production are still considered a nuisance, especially the large livestock, particularly cattle. Poultry is allowed, but cattle or dairy cattle are allowed slightly in the peri-urban areas of the city. So these are some of the urban food policies that have emerged since 2010 to respond to the changes in the need to produce within the city. So the governance arrangements have not changed quite like the policies have changed. When we look at the land use and production, there are quite a number of agencies which had a responsibility around production and land use. They have listed a number there: ministries of agriculture, lands, planning, and so on. Then there are survey, remote sensing departments of government. But what we see is that there is very little coordination between the agencies that are in charge of land use, for example. The Ministry of Agriculture, for example, are vigorously promoting agriculture, especially among poor households in the city. But the other ministries, for example, of land surveys, are not giving those permissions as required, because from their perspective, that is not a land use. Although it has been passed in law and some of the policies, the officials of these ministries aren't recognizing this as something that they wish to support. Similarly, in food marketing and trade, there are very many different agencies, ministries, informal traders, supermarkets, multinational firms. But interestingly, in the governance arrangements of the food system, of the different elements of this food system, the discussions aren't involving, especially the private sector actors, and in particular, the informal sector, which controls more than 2/3 of the food in Nairobi. The same thing around food distribution, many agencies within government, private sector, but very little coordination. Food consumption, for example, around food safety and health, there are about 22 different legislations and regulations around food safety controlled by many different agencies within government, ranging from the Kenya Bureau of Standards, Pharmacy and Poisons Board, Public Health Standards Board, the mainstream Ministry of Health, and so on and so forth, to the extent that is not clear who is coordinating these aspects of the food system. So when you look at overall what has emerged is that in terms of enhancing equitable access to food, at least among the poor in the city, they can be allowed to conduct some food production. There's now home gardens coming up among low-income groups. But there are very limited actions to regulate prices, control quality of staples, fruits and vegetables, and in particular, improving food distribution. And when you talk about nutrition aspects, public health and nutrition, and there are specific aspects within the policies that seek to identify marginalized groups, actions proposed to enhance production of food by marginalized groups. But as I mentioned earlier, allocation of land, especially along railway lines where most people are practicing, is still very contentious, and the public health has been very critical about this. And I've already mentioned about spatial plans now recognizing agriculture, which is a very strong point. And for this reason, a number of agriculture production has really grown within the city. But there are no specific measurable goals or actions seeking to support some of these actions. So these are some of the food production activities. As I mentioned, crop is very well supported and through many agencies. Livestock, particularly poultry, very much supported, but dairy and other livestock uses such as, for example, piggery, are not very well supported by especially the ministries of health. So in concluding, since 2010, there have been a number of policies seeking to support an integrated food system within Nairobi City, but there are no specific actions and coordinating framework which would help in their implementation. So a number of them have not quite been implemented. During the context of COVID, for example, it was not clear who was in charge of getting the food to the city population, which suggests, therefore, that there is need for a comprehensive food policy that integrates multiple actors or multiple agencies within the food system in the city. I've already mentioned about food policy still continuing to be much more productionist. Even when the city the city government has put in place an agriculture and livestock law, they are much more into production and very little on supporting markets, efficient distribution systems and processing. There is a very complex governance structure, many actors with conflicting interests and minimal coordination. And we think that a food strategy with coordinating arrangements might be a way forward to deal with this gap. I've already mentioned of implementation of policies which are weak or lacking. Some of the policies have a potential to address some of the issues, but the implementation framework needs to be improved. The role of the private sector and even their involvement in setting up the structures and the policies is weak, and therefore there is need to consider involving more private actors. The other thing that I wish to finish off with is that there is very little consideration of the rural suburban areas that supply food to the city. Majority of the food, actually, probably about 80% of the city comes from the neighboring and sometimes a bit distant rural areas. So there is need to consider the relationship between the urban and the peri-urban areas if there's going to be much more sustainable food system within the city. We wish to acknowledge the Food and Agriculture Organization, Africa Regional Office in Nairobi, the Nairobi County Government, and my University of Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. Very nice and clear presentation. Very interesting. So thanks a lot for that. I can see there's already a first question. It's a very long question. I think I will read that to you. Read that out to you. That's again from Mr. Joost Dessijn. Let me just read it to you. Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned the importance of urban agriculture for low-income groups, marginalized groups, and so on. In many cities, however, we see a dual movement for urban agriculture with low-income groups as well as upper-class people being involved. This is, for instance, the case in Dar es Salaam. For the marginalized groups, it is another way of accessing food. For the upper class people, it is a search for better quality food, also for identity building. Do you see a similar dual movement in Nairobi, or is it only low-income groups that are involved? I think that's a very good question. So to what extent are these different groups, high and low-income groups, involved in this? Okay. Do you have an answer to that, Robert?
Yes, I'll attempt to respond to that. Thank you very much for that question. Now, the speaker, I didn't get the name of the speaker, but I need to say that yes, the movement on urban agriculture is actually being responded to both by the low-income households, but also from the middle and higher income households. And in particular, actually, may I say, the low-income and slightly higher income, because the middle income are living in neighborhoods where probably food production might not be possible. Mm-hmm. But for the low-income households, what we are seeing since 2011 is concerted efforts by the ministries of agriculture, the city departments in charge of agriculture, and non-governmental organizations and development agencies to support food production by the very poor within the city areas. And in one of the, in a number of the very poor areas, for example, there has been supply of clean water to support food production. The city government now has provided, for example, in areas that have contaminated soil, supply of soil. Their youth groups are being supported to have water tanks and irrigation systems. So there has been a concerted effort seeking to help the low-income communities. The much more higher income communities, even before this was legalized, the higher income communities were, as a form of identity, as a form of, as they say, as he said or she said, promoting more quality food, because food quality is a big problem in Nairobi, are producing food within their back gardens, using multi-story gardens, for example. And so this is something that is going on in both, among both groups of income groups. But let me also say that the issue of food safety that is pushing higher income households to actually produce food, but also as a form of identity, has made organic agriculture, which Chukuma was talking about, kind of like start growing within the peri-urban areas of the city. And now there are urban markets which are known to produce food, or especially crops, which have low pesticide levels. And so there is a trend where the much higher income households now are able to access what they would consider higher quality food.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I was wondering, while I was listening to your presentation, has there actually been done a lot of research or any research on the impact of urban agriculture on household income, for example, or on dietary diversity and so on? Actually, these pathways which have been mentioned by Shukuma before. Are you aware of a lot of research in this field, Robert?
Yes, there hasn't been lots of research, but just early this year, and this was done in the context of COVID-19, CIAT, the International Center for Tropical Agriculture, did a study among, they had a big sample of slightly over 2,000 households within Nairobi to see the context of those that are producing food within the city and their household food security levels. And there was a small, marginal difference between those poor, low-income households that produced food. So they were slightly better off in terms of their diversity, in terms of the overall, especially with regard to consumption of leafy green vegetables, because again, those are the ones largely produced within these contexts. So that is the one I know of, and I don't think there have been, there are other studies, one done in 2014 or 15 that I'm aware of, that looked at a very specific suburban area within Nairobi, but not many.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, you had also told us at the beginning that these different acts are quite new acts, so from 2011 and so on. So probably it takes some time until sort of this really takes off and people legally actually do urban agriculture, I could imagine. Do you think that COVID-19 has actually promoted urban agriculture to some extent, or you think, I mean, I don't know to what extent there might have been certain shortages of certain types of food during fresh fruit, for example, or fresh vegetable during the pandemic, which is actually still ongoing. But do you think, does it promote actually urban agriculture to some extent?
Yes, what has been documented so far from the CIAT study and a blog by the RUA Foundation, the Regional Urban Food System Foundation, demonstrate that people, especially within low-income households, again, that there are people who started or increased their share of urban food production during COVID, again, as a way of responding, perhaps because of loss of job or having more time at their disposal at home, And so those studies have actually demonstrated that indeed there was a slight increase in low-income households producing food within the city.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't see any further questions at the moment. Then I would like to proceed and come to the last speaker. And that will be Dr. Benedict Mongula from the University of Dar es Salaam. Benedict, since you also put your bio online, let me mention that you have been actually an associate professor and you have retired now. So I thought I should mention that since you put it online. It's accessible to everybody. And you have submitted a paper or an abstract together with two of your colleagues, and that will be on the Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor in Tanzania, and the impact and the implication for food and nutrition security in the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm very curious to learn about the situation in Tanzania, and yes, the floor is yours.
Oh. Well, good afternoon or evening. It's evening time here in Dar es Salaam. My presentation is on the Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor in Tanzania. It's a program and its implications on food and nutrition, and especially in the context of security, in the context of COVID-19 crisis. So our presentation is based on a study, three of us. I share with Dr. Makundi and Dr. Oshayo, and it's supported by the Bill and Melinda Gates GC 22. Now, SAGOT, what is SAGOT? Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor of Tanzania. This is a program to promote large-scale agriculture, largely in the southern corridor of the country, extending from the eastern part, the Indian Ocean, through to the borders of Malawi, Zambia, and DRC, Congo. So it's a program that was conceived and championed by private investors, the government, and development partners, in line with partnership framework proposed by the G20 and endorsed by the UN General Assembly in 2012. The G20 and UN partnership framework was guided by broad principles of responsible agricultural investments, RAI, which are intended for a win-win situation between investors, labor, and local communities. In SAGOT, investors supported by government and development partners in consultation with civil society and farmers' organizations were expected to bring under cultivation 450,000 hectares, farming benefiting local population in terms of creating employment, outgrow smallholder farms, and also in terms of corporate social responsibility. A SAGOT partnership of members became created, consisting of investors, the central government, local governments, civil society organizations, and development partners or donors. And this is coordinated by a SAGOT Center Limited, whose job is to facilitate the members towards inclusive, sustainable, and commercially viable agricultural investments. The partnership of SAGOT was guided by a set of principles a bit narrower than the responsible agricultural investment principles generated by the G20 and the UN and also World Bank. These basically aimed at promoting the twin objectives of SAGOT, namely commercial growth and poverty reduction. The members of the partnership, the SAGOT partnership, were expected to cooperate with other members to engage smallholder farmers, maintain communication, and be prepared to resolve policy and infrastructure complaints. So these were largely the principles guiding the partnership. The benefits of agribusiness. Benefits of agribusiness, they benefit smallholder farmers and villages near them in terms of providing wage employment, market to outgrowers and other smallholder farmers, sources of credit, improvement of infrastructure, improving and spreading technology and farmer skills. Those benefits are expected to contribute to increased productivity, incomes, and poverty reduction. However, if not implemented responsibly, large investments could cause or could lead to forced eviction and displacement of smallholder farmers. They could lead to unfair compensation of land. They could lead to exploitation of laborers through low wage rates and indecent jobs in general. They could lead to exploitation of smallholder farmers and outgrowers through low prices, debt, bondedness, dependency, and last but not least, could lead to food insecurity. This therefore calls for careful assessment of the practice of the partners in order to ensure that members adhere to the SAGOT Code of Conduct and Partnership. Unfortunately, the SAGOT Code of Conduct and Partnership principles themselves do not adequately prevent those problems. The implementation of SAGOT itself, a number of underestimated problems have impacted on SAGOT, including unavailability of land due to lack of expected land bank, but also due to resistance from small landowners, due to bureaucracy and shift of government orientation away from large agricultural investments. Since 2015, a new government came in power, and the government has shifted its attention away from large agricultural investors. Although some of the existing and reputable agribusiness have tried to proceed responsibly, this has not gone without problems for a number of them. The pace of establishing new agricultural investments has been slow, but also there's a problem of low wages, there's a problem of displacements and unfair compensations, there's a problem of low prices and unreliability of markets to smallholder farmers and outgrowers. These kinds of problems have not helped to reduce poverty and insecurity. The effects of COVID-19. COVID-19 crisis has demonstrated a multitude of impacts towards many of the large-scale agricultural investments in SAGOT region, and obviously to their commitments to labor, to outgrowers, and the local communities. The underlying aim of embarking on SAGOT was to enhance local, national, and world food security, while promoting agricultural productivity, creating employment, and reducing poverty in the developing country concerned. All these apparently were affected in the wake of COVID-19 crisis. The effects, would say that, let me point out first of all that Tanzania had no official lockdown during the COVID-19, but it exercised minimal restrictions of human activity requiring observation of government and health advice on hygiene, washing hands and so on, social distancing and wearing of masks. Air travel, closure of few public services like schools and universities were done, but these were short-lived. So the COVID-19 effects on SAGOT were caused more by lockdowns elsewhere rather than in Tanzania, mainly in her major trading partners, and these affected exports and supply chains, financing, and thereby investors and producers' operations and demand for labor. The most direct effect on the large-scale agricultural investments has therefore been disruption of exports due to the lockdowns and travel restrictions on drivers, decline of world commodity prices due to shrinking consumption, and to some extent disruption of supplies from trading partners. Hundreds of trucks carrying exports and essential supplies to agricultural investors got stranded at borders in Kenya and border with Zambia. And while tea from Mufindi and Njombe areas, avocado from Njombe, poultry and dairy products from Iringa, and timber from Kilombero Valley, etc. While these were affected by declining markets and prices. Also, the supply of essential inputs such as fertilizers, soybeans, and other efficient feeds for livestock and poultry was limited by cross-border and travel restrictions and shipment barriers. The newly enacted law mandating auctions of export commodities made things even worse during the international travel bans. As a result of those combined forces, investors were forced to limit their operations, thus cutting down on labor and contractor services, thereby causing temporary unemployment and exacerbating poverty and food insecurity, contrary to the aims of SAGOT. Meanwhile, there were additional costs to the investors. The costs imposed on the investors to meet the supplies of masks and sanitizers, and combined with marketing and declining operations, this led to fall of profit margins affecting their commitments in loan repayments, taxes, and corporate social responsibility. In conclusion, we would like to point out that the aims of SAGOT, namely to combat national and global food security, became impeded by COVID-19 crisis. Prior to COVID-19, SAGOT already faced a number of challenges hampering access to food security. But COVID-19 has only served to make matters worse by reducing SAGOT chances of contributing to global, regional food security while contributing to national and local food insecurity. Thank you very much. Is any?
Thank you very much, Benedict. I think this were very important, very insightful news from Tanzania, from the SAGOT. Now, the question to everybody again, do you have any questions? If you have any question, please type it in on the website of the Tropentag. So in the meantime, while you are all typing, let's start the discussion here. I was wondering, you have nicely shown all the challenges and the impacts and sort of the, also the benefits of SAGOT. I was wondering if COVID-19 would not have happened. So imagine SAGOT without COVID-19. Would you say SAGOT is a sort of a success story? Or how do you judge this initiative?
Okay, well, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, well, yes, supposing there is no COVID-19, SAGOT has mixed the impacts. One, of course, there are some positive things. For sure, those investors who have held to responsible agricultural investments, you could see when we visited them that labor was, although I mean still not paid at living wages, but still their conditions were relatively good. So the conditions for labor were okay. The conditions to the outgrower farmers were also okay. And the conditions to the local communities were also fairly okay. So, but this I'm saying applies to a number, just a few. I wouldn't say it cuts across, doesn't cut across, because there are cases of investors where definitely there were a lot of malpractices And so food insecurity became even serious, where there are displacements, people are displaced from their land, and where labor conditions were not as good. So it's very difficult to judge and say that this is a complete success story. It goes case by case. There are cases for sure which are clear-cut, that you can see there's an effort of the large investor working closely with local communities, with labor, to improve conditions and so on. But there are cases for sure where things were not that good. And even when the new government got in, it kind of interceded in some cases, and some lands which had been taken away from farmers had to be returned, and so it's a success story in a way, but not so much, because, as I said, there have been quite a number of problems that have hindered a quick, rapid increase of investments, of large-scale investments, especially things to do with bureaucracy, to do with resistance of the smallholder farmers, to do with the large investors themselves not keeping to the responsible investment practices as advocated in the responsible agricultural investment principles. So, but COVID-19 for sure comes in to make things worse, because some workers are reduced because the supplies, sometimes the supplies have declined, so some workers are reduced. The marketing problems, so some workers are reduced. And when they are reduced, it means that their conditions are affected. So, yes.
Okay, thank you. In the meantime, there is a question again by Joost. So thank you, first of all. You mentioned that COVID-19 threatened the corporate social responsibility. However, a time of crisis might be the ideal context to maintain and strengthen CSR. Is it not in times of crisis that CSR, so corporate social responsibility, is even more urgent and useful? I don't know, is that understandable?
Yes, understood. It's understandable. Yes, it's true. It's ideal. The ideal situation would be that in times of crisis, CSR should be increased rather than be reduced by at that time. But then we should also note that when the provision of corporate social responsibility is not ordinarily linked to the profits. So when the profitability, when the profits dwindle, when the investors' markets decline, when therefore their profits decline, it means that this affects their ability to live to their commitments of corporate social responsibility. So this is they go together. When the profits go down, it means that the CSR also reduces. Although it would have been really good that the CSR should have been increased, but then unfortunately CSR normally depends on the abilities of the investors to make profits. There's a linkage.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? As I said, if you have a question, you can write it down. Chupuma, do you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. I was wondering because from your presentation, you showed how these large agribusinesses have an impact on the smallholder farmers. And it's impossible for the large agribusinesses to operate in isolation. They have to work together somehow, have an impact on the smallholder farmers. Can you maybe, from what you saw from the field, is there a strategy that you can propose on how these two sets of people can exist within the corridor? Is there a way that they can work together? Are there some solutions to the problem that you mentioned?
Yes. Well, I would say for sure, the large investors have to work closely with the smallholder farmers and the outgrowers, and they should cooperate, and so that there can be reduced conflict. There to reduce conflict between them. So, is there a way for them to work closely together? Yes, of course. That's why I said some of the large investors are fairly open and transparent in their dealings. And they engage the smallholders, they engage the local communities very closely. I noticed in the ones that I visited, very close cooperation. You find people from the local community visiting the investor, they're having close talk, they're discussing the problems in their villages and so on. So there is that kind of close collaboration, close cooperation, transparency in whatever they are doing. That one facilitates, that can facilitate greater chances for the large investors to contribute effectively towards the intended goals of reducing poverty while they are promoting their own commercial interests. So yes, there is a chance, but also it all depends on government mediation. There should be a mediation, there should be a way, for example, of the Support Center Limited to do more monitoring, to go and visit and see what is happening between the investors and the local communities. This can increase the chances, because this way they can be able to resolve some of the problems that are hindering close collaboration, and which can therefore promote and increase the contribution of the investors to reducing poverty, increasing food security, and so on and so forth.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, there's one further question from the audience, from Rex Paro. Let me read it to you. With or without COVID-19, how does the legislation in Dar es Salaam be affected in terms of food production through your implemented project?
Okay. With or without COVID-19, how does the legislation improve or impact on this? Yes, legislation is no longer in Dar es Salaam these days. Legislation is in Dodoma. So there's a change of the capital city, Dodoma now instead of Dar es Salaam. Yes, legislation is something that could help. I think what we need here is more information to those who make policies and decisions in the parliament. We need more information, more research information, so that those problems which are emanating from those large-scale investments can be known, they can be made public, they can be discussed, and decisions can be made on them. Unfortunately, so far, and I think I should have pointed out, SAGOT emanated largely from private investors, government and development partners, and in fact is the World Economic Forum that actually brought this up. So the World Economic Forum is not a Tanzanian organization, it's a broad international organization. So the investors have a big push in this. And so it's up to the government, actually, as you're saying, and I agree with you completely. Legislation, government should come in with policies, with the legal measures, with acts that can be able to minimize, can be able to prevent, minimize, reduce those kinds of conflicts that SAGOT may impact on the local community. So yes, I agreed completely that we need more information. We need research that can bring out the issues, the actual practice, the actual problems that are being felt, and that can then feed into the policy making. So yes, I agreed completely that the legislation can do a good job in improving the performance of SAGOT in achieving the intended goals and objectives of improving food security and nutrition nationally, regionally, and globally.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Any further questions from the audience? I think we have 347 people listening to us. I don't know, but it's indicated here. So are you all listening? Have you been all listening? So you should have lots of questions. Robert, do you have a question?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. And thank you, Benedict, for that presentation. What lessons do you think other large-scale agribusiness enterprises across Africa can learn from SACOT? Or what can SACOT learn from other large-scale agribusiness enterprises? I don't know whether you got my question.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, yes, indeed, we could learn from Kenya as much where there's a lot of agribusiness, bigger than in Tanzania. Yeah, there are lessons that we can draw from other places, from African countries, from Latin America, from many parts of the world. They've had large-scale agriculture, and these have had impacts on the local communities, on the smallholder farmers and so on. Yes, I think we should learn, because we are not in fact, not only from other countries, even from Tanzania itself, because large-scale agriculture began right from during colonialism, during colonial period, during German colonial period, during British colonial period. There was large-scale agriculture, and there were problems at that time, and the same problems are arising right now. So there are problems with dealing with the smallholder farmers, with the villagers and so on, and they are rising right now. And the same, I think you can learn from other countries also. I think they also have similar problems. So I think that's why I would say the whole concept of responsible agricultural investments was invented, and which is very detailed. It's demarcating how large-scale agriculture should involve the local communities, how they should engage them. It's talking about how large-scale agriculture should deal with labor. It's talking about how they should deal with the environment, with the So the whole concept of responsibility is a really good concept. Unfortunately, large investors always have a way to go around these things. Although they may be exercising some of the principles, they have a way of going around it. For example, they can shift the risks, their own risks, to the outgrowers, so that outgrowers bear the risks, and they can go on paying very good wages and so on. But outgrowers, conditions are there, and there's no way of monitoring them. So there's no scrutiny of the outgrowers. So yes, we can learn. We should be able to learn. But I think the most important thing is for the policy makers, for the government, and for other concerned organizations to do a close monitoring and evaluation of what is going on in the farms, and to always find a way in decision making, in policies and so on, to deal with the problems. Yes, I think there are lessons to draw from other countries, and I think what our study will do is to draw more also from experiences, places like Kenya, which has had agribusiness for a big way. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Mongula. So now I just realized we have only 1 minute left, so time passes by very quickly. So I don't dare summarizing our discussion, but let me just sort of briefly summarize. Yes, we had a framework, very nice framework, which was presented by Chukwuma. Then we had, and which he will apply to Nigeria in the future. Then we had a very specific field, a subsector, which was water management, the nice case study from Helga from Bolivia. Then we had the urban food policy from Kenya. Robert, thank you very much. And Benedict, you provided us a lot of insights also related to COVID-19 on Sagot. I think that was also very interesting and very insightful thoughts from you. Thank you very much for that. So I would like to thank the 4 speakers and also the audience for participating a little bit. And I hope that you enjoyed it. And have a nice remaining Tropentag, and goodbye. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much, Ulrike. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helga. Ciao.